Hi to all my friends at the TOC-ICO. I'm glad to be in front of you all again, and I hope this presentation gives you some inspiration to do something that you haven't done yet. Let's see how it goes. We've all seen case studies of TOC implemented in businesses, small and even big ones that cover whole city blocks. We know the TOC in service companies like engineering firms and software developers, that works great, even charities. Chris Cox, Alfredo Maicu, Kevin Fox, and others have used TOC in government in multiple states. Some of the military applications from around the world have been phenomenal. Ellie's book, The Choice, Efrat's work on personal dilemmas, TOC for Education, and Odyssey, all delivered to us personally as human beings. All of these things are systems. Systems are built up of subsystems. Each fractal has its own constraint. What's the concern that makes us ache? Did we go far enough? Did we get everybody on board? Did it last? Did we address the system's holistic constraint or stop after a part or two? I want to talk today about using TOC in a broader way. Using TOC to help a whole country, an industry, a group of nations, what I'll call global implementations. What would have to be in place to make a global implementation possible and practical? I mean, what would ensure the necessary buy-in? Why would anybody deviate from what's comfortable, familiar, and most everybody else is doing it too, so I'm a part of the herd? When you're scared for your life might be the answer. In Ellie Goldrat's buy-in terms, it's when the alligator is really big and immediately threatening. People will do anything to get away from an imminent, highly dangerous threat. You all know that when a human being is threatened, adrenaline is secreted by the old lizard brain, triggering the 3 F's: freeze, fight, or flight. Now, if the gator's big enough, there's no freeze and there's no fight. You run. And there's no thinking going on when we're triggered. Offer to save somebody in such a situation, and I expect you'll find buy-in easy. I'd love to tell you I know how to gain buy-in globally without the gator, but I'd be lying. So what kind of circumstances would be enough to set up acceptance of a global TOC implementation? Oh, like now. And a war would do it. A depression ought to be enough. A shift in an industry due to some disruptive new technology might even get her done. Even a major blunder by government. Now back to today and the pandemic. Which industry has been hit the hardest? How to know? One of the things I would suggest is watching the U.S. government seems a pretty good idea because they can print money out of thin air to invest into strategic areas or industries to protect them. So where do they go? What bailouts did we see? Well, bailout went to protect the airlines. So far, almost $80 billion with a B, which sounds like a lot until you consider that together, all the airlines so far have lost $370 billion. And airlines are absolutely critical to the world economy. Directly and indirectly, travel and tourism is 12 trillion. That's a T trillion dollars per year. 14% of the world economy. Big enough? Crucial enough? A good place for my story to begin. To put COVID's impact on commercial aviation into perspective, let me give you a little background. Here's a chart that compares the dips after the 9/11 attacks right here and the 2008 debt bomb. Now, both times you see a drop here in the year-over-year run rate, It took 2.7 years to recover after a one-day duration attack here in 9/11. And then financial crisis, 6+ years to recover from that. So let's go a little deeper. And you can see, obviously, the impact here was far worse than anything we've ever seen before. I imagine it's going to last longer than anything we've seen before, and that's a shame. Wouldn't it be great to rescue the aviation industry, to get them back flying sooner, to get us all traveling, to get tourism back, to get travel back? Do you remember Ellie doing this to you? Continuing to think after you thought you were finished? This is a graphic from a blog I posted about 10 years ago. Theory of constraints folks should be familiar with the Bullwhip Effect, where disruptions are magnified back up the supply chain, and down in this case. So magnifications are going down the supply chain and displaced in time. It's what MIT's beer game demonstrates. It occurs when the links in the supply chain communicate through orders instead of sharing actual consumer demand. Upstream impact can come as a complete surprise because the cause is long forgotten by the time it manifests. For example, a copper mine closes because it costs more to produce the copper than you can sell it for. Nobody remembers why. Boom and bust cycles plague various industries. The result is that consumers pay wildly fluctuating prices over time. Think gasoline. Do you see that TOC could stop this economically disruptive pattern while lowering inventories across the supply chain? All the supply chains. In my example, airplanes got bailouts. What about airports? Oh, that could be bad for them. They've lost $115 billion. What about air navigation services? Another $13 billion. What about the maintenance and repair supply chain upstream of the airlines? Looking at this slide, they must have been hit harder, and Congress only helped them if they retained their payrolls. Did they? Could they? So a global TOC implementation would be huge in these situations. Now let's look at simplified logic. I'm not showing all the cause and effect here, but just the chain of simplified logic. We start here with COVID-19. As we all know, we weren't able to fly. That makes the airlines hemorrhage cash. So they do everything they can to keep from running low on cash. We all saw the pictures in the news of hundreds of planes parked on runways, nose to tail, in as many rows as the tarmac allowed. Because both of these last two, virtually no engine maintenance was performed. After all, maintenance uses up money, and they were perfectly good planes just sitting there parked. This led to a dearth of parts sales. Now, please shed a tear with me. One of my companies in our TOC Equity Partners Fund, Hawkeye Engine Services, which I presented as a case study 7 years ago in 2014, lost over 95% of their sales. Here's a reminder of what I presented then. Let me show you one slide from my TOC ICO presentation, Investing with TOC Part 2, as I said, delivered in Washington, D.C. back in 2014. This is time across the bottom here, 2012, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, etc., all the way up through third quarter 2014. The vertical line here shows when the shift, the changeover occurred from the cost world to the throughput world. And you can see that very quickly the red line is our EBITDA. And for those of you who are not financially savvy, EBITDA means earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And the value of any company is a multiple of EBITDA, 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, whatever it is, times EBITDA. But the earning power tells people what they want to give for your company. Now, you'll see also that the green line is the number of employees. I'm using that to measure complication. So we want the complication not to go up as fast as the throughput goes up, and you can see that's happening here in this chart. So we had a huge success story with Hawkeye. We took them from $3 million a year to $3 million a month in sales in a bad month. Now, aviation logistics, more than just the parts sales like Hawkeye does, it's a three-legged stool. They're parts resellers, like I said. They buy engines, used engines, worn-out engines, end-of-life engines, and send them to MROs to be torn down into parts. The parts get individually inspected, each one, to see if they're in spec. For example, here's a part right here. You can see that's the part right there where it's not in spec, right, with the little lines drawn on there. If they need repair before they can be safely used, then they go to the parts repair shops, Section 145 parts repair stations. When finished, the ready-to-fly parts are sent back to the reseller again, over here to the parts reseller. And they're left there until somebody needs those parts. Each of these legs is tightly controlled by the FAA and its international counterparts. Back to the logic. If nobody's buying parts, there's no need for repairs. Now look at what I've got here. At the top row, all three legs, the parts repairs goes here, the parts sales goes here, the engine maintenance is here. It's all three legs, isn't it, of the aviation logistics. All three have been abandoned for over a year. What happens to a company when it has no revenue for even a few months? Unless they collapse their OE, which is the same as destroying their capacity, they go out of business, except for a very few that are supported by extraordinarily deep pockets. We know this. I'm freaked out because Hawkeye's going out of business. Furthermore, so are all of our suppliers. And into my mind comes this guy. Those of us who knew Ellie well are familiar with this look. It means the problem that you just told him about and have been worrying about for months or years, he's already solved in a few moments. Now he grins at you, staring intently, waiting for you to get it. So I kept on thinking because that look was in my head. Picking up where we left off, if nobody's buying parts, there's no need to buy engines because used engines are the source of parts that go into engine rebuilds. At least you want to use used parts because the cost to rebuild an engine with new parts is at least $2 million more expensive per engine, about half again more. And if nobody's buying engines, what happens to engine prices? You guessed it, they collapse. Almost all these elements so far are observable facts. And this brings me to my second conclusion. At the beginning, this brings me to my second conclusion and the beginning of the direction to the solution. It's the right time, isn't it, to buy parts, to buy engines right now. Notice that in the title, I added assumptions. Here is the only one I'll make. Given vaccinations and time, people will go back to flying. Add to that the availability of parts is limited to those that remain on hand. With a lack of inventory, much less capacity, and a backlog of work that's been building up for more than a year, it will take a long time to perform the necessary maintenance required by the various governments. Then the economic teeter-totter will slam down on the other side, and the buyer's market will evaporate, and maintenance providers will raise those same prices that were previously so badly depressed. That gives us our timing. And boy, what timing it'll be, because that'll be the time to sell these parts. As we wrote in Throughput Economics, this is how to make decisions in the face of uncertainty. A one-number forecast is of no use. There's always a range of possible outcomes. In the case of the aviation deal, we have three main areas of uncertainty. We don't know how cheaply we can buy the engines. And that's where we get our parts. We don't know what the repaired parts will sell for, but intuitively we think it's going to be a lot. And lastly, we don't know the timing. Faced with unknowns, we start with the facts, and then we consider our intuition, which is by definition approximate at best. It's time to consult both Ellies. Ellie Goldratt called his last pillar of TOC, never say I know. Ellie Schrangenheim added a corollary. Admitting we don't know everything does not mean we know nothing. Both are always true. They're the same coin, different sides, different for every opportunity. As you can see, my own articulation is openness to improve, which I hope captures the sense of both sides of the coin. Using our powerful intuition, it's our job to estimate an expected range that gives us about a 90% probability. Let me overlay a table that shows what the total sales of parts that we might pay $100 million for, what they might bring in terms of sales. To keep from over-promising and under-delivering to investors, I made a conservative guess. Inside my reasonable range, you can see that it's shaded here and here. I guessed that parts would eventually sell from normal prices to 25% more than normal. Now they could be triple, I don't know, but this is a conservative guess. And with respect to how much we'd have to pay for those parts, I guess we'd pay something between 45% discount and a 60% discount, less than what used to be normal. Right now, the costs are 75% off, and prices already are at a 30% premium, so somewhere up here. So what that suggests is that we're someplace between here and here on this chart. And there's no way to know this advanced. There's no way to know this exactly in advance. Current prices are therefore about 4.5 times what we pay to buy those same parts. And it's only getting better as time passes. This level of return makes an investment extremely attractive. The only nagging question is, why don't the airlines do this themselves? Remember, this is another admonition from Ellie. If the idea seems to be too good to be true, check to make sure you clearly understand why nobody before you has successfully tried it. Okay, let's check for the airline, shall we? I would have loved to start the presentation with this slide, but I had to tell you the background story first. Let's review the airline's predicament. So their goal is to preserve their cash now. Therefore, maintenance work accumulates. It's no problem if maintenance work accumulates for a week or two, but when it accumulates for a year or two, then maintenance capacity is permanently destroyed. And if it's destroyed, then when the recovery comes, you know there are going to be lost throughput because there'll be customers that you can't serve. And you know that customers will be pissed, and they'll blame the airlines because they know nobody else to blame. They've never met the people in the supply chain. And if they knew what happened to them, they wouldn't blame them either. So the airlines don't want their customers mad at them, and they don't want to lose the throughput. This forces them to buy parts now. But if they buy parts now, here's how it goes wrong. Repair parts and engines now. Why? Because there's capacity now, and if I don't use the capacity, it'll be gone later. So it has to be done now, during the lull when nobody really wants anything done. And then losses for the airlines would go up and their cash would flow out the door. What they're worried about, of course, is that they go bankrupt. So the owners of a company that go bankrupt end up not owning the company that went bankrupt. The company may survive, but the investors and the shareholders in that company are completely wiped out. So the risk of bankruptcy forces them to come down here to preserve cash. Now, can you see that there is no way? I mean, these are two alligators. This one is bad. This one is devastating. I say they stay over here on the right-hand side of the infinity loop. And by the way, this is the same thing that WiseTech calls figure eights, and same thing that they call druids. So if you've heard those terms, same thing. Basically, these are just the arguments that happen if I try to do D in a cloud, and you say, but D changes the likelihood of me being able to meet my need, the C need. Therefore, you have to do D prime, which is my suggested alternative. But then you say back to me, well, but then that endangers my B need. So it's the arguments that people have about clouds. I find these are intuitive and easily shared with anybody, even if they don't know anything about a cloud. To summarize, what did you come to understand from my example of a global application of TOC? First, and this is the key, the cause and effect logic tells us that the constraint for the whole industry must shift from people buying tickets to maintenance. Let me reiterate the importance of intuition. In this case, I was worried about Hawkeye. Remember, if you can't solve a problem, solve a bigger one. Generalized our problem, thought out into the future, confirmed why the problem wouldn't be solved by the airlines, and realized a business to address the need. That's the process. Next, we realized that there's more money in the economy than before due to government stimulus. That money went to regular people. They spent it. So rich people got it and invested in the stock market, which is at all-time highs. Now, a characteristic of capitalistic economies is that they naturally draw investment from areas of surplus into attractive opportunities for investment, places where there are high returns. 200 years ago, Baron Rockefeller said, the way to make money is to buy when there's blood in the streets, even if the blood is your own. That was after the Battle of Waterloo, and it applied to me when Hawkeye turned from a gold mine into just a means of draining away money. So what we do is we buy engines that are at this moment selling for 25% of what they did in early 2020, when we had a good business, by the way. You may think this next advice is easy, but it will require courage. We spend money to tear the engines down to parts, repair those parts, and rebuild other engines while nobody wants them. And we wait until the constraint shift is complete. And then the easy part, the fun part, we sell the parts at a premium. And I've showed you one there. Here's one here. It's an HPT blade. Best part we got. So we'll sell them at premium prices to airlines that will find the fact that we even have the parts a blessing. Because remember, they've got a $100 million, $600 million, they're in that range. Individual airplanes that they can't use, that they're paying money on, and customers begging them to take them somewhere. So I think they'll find it a blessing. Now, what other kind of global implementations are possible? Remember, all it takes is a big enough gator. What do you think? Are global implementations possible? Let me stop here to take your questions.